Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Healthy X Sundays podcast, where we bring you the most critical and actionable content in the health and fitness space. Dave from Mind Muscle Pro and I, Kunal Jain, also known as the Veg Diet Coach, are your hosts. We are thrilled to welcome Mr. PD Mangan on the Healthy X Sundays podcast. Mr. PD Mangan is a globally recognized health and fitness optimization expert with over 40 years of experience helping individuals transform their bodies and improve their health. He has worked with more than 1,200 private clients from around the world, including couples, to achieve sustainable health and fitness transformations. What sets Mr. Mangan apart is his completely independent coaching practice. With no affiliations to companies, products, or services, he offers unbiased, evidence based guidance tailored to his clients' specific needs. His priority is aligning with clients' goals and never recommending unnecessary blood work, supplements, or interventions. Mr. Mangan's approach is rooted in efficiency, designed for those with busy lives. He believes health transformations don't require endless hours in the gym. Instead, with just two 25-minute sessions per week, whether at home or in the gym, clients can see remarkable results without sacrificing valuable time. In addition to his coaching, Mr. Mangan is a celebrated author of books such as Dumping Iron, Muscle Up, Best Supplements for Men, and Stop the Clock, each of which provides actionable strategies for improving health, building muscle, and optimizing longevity. His expertise, which draws on his background in microbiology, biochemistry, and pharmacology, has been featured in top publications like Men's Health, Women's Health, and Shape. We are excited to dive into his philosophy on fitness, his client centered approach, and his strategies for achieving lasting health transformations in today's fast paced world. Get ready for a conversation filled with actionable insights and inspiration. So, welcome to the show, PD.
Thanks, Kunal. Thanks for inviting me. Great to be here.
So, can you tell us about your journey? How did you get into fitness at a later stage in your life?
I was kind of into fitness a lot since I was a lot younger. Starting like in my early 20s or something. But I was doing it very differently. I got into distance running. It started to become popular when I was about that age, so like in the 1970s. And so I took it up pretty enthusiastically and ended up running long distances. I've run a couple of marathons in my life, and it was very regular for me to go out and, run 10 miles or something on a weekend, lesser amounts during the week. But anyway, I did that a lot. And, and anyway, I was very concerned about avoiding heart disease and so on, because it's been in my family. I did that for a long time. When I was in middle age, my health wasn't the greatest. I had chronic fatigue, and I had that for quite a few years, and I was trying to figure out how to fix that. Doctors couldn't help me. Long story short, I more or less, stumbled onto my current way of training and eating and so on, and that's been for about the last 15 years or so. Got seriously into resistance training. And then, I wrote my books and got on Twitter, now X, and so on. So, that's basically how I got here.
Interesting.
So, you're known for defying age-related stereotypes. What like key mindset will you to transform yourself?
What, well, so, well, resistance training is, of course, very important. So building muscle is very important. Everybody should be doing it. The thing is, when people age, they lose muscle. This is very it's a universal fact that people lose muscle as they age. And so, you think about aging and you think about older people without muscle, but this actually starts happening at, what we think of as a relatively young age. It can be detected when people are 30 years old. So somebody who's 30 years old will typically have less muscle than they did when they were 20. And this goes on with each passing year and decade, and it accelerates so that after the age of 50 or so, this definitely accelerates, and so people can be losing a lot of muscle. Then when these people get into older age. So when somebody's quite old, like let's say 80 years old, they can have lost half the muscle that they had when they were younger. And so this is really a disaster for people who are this old because it leads to frailty. It leads to dependence. So, if someone cannot literally get out of a chair without help, then they're in trouble. They need constant help, and this often leads to a nursing home, this kind of situation, which is bad. But even before then, the loss of muscle is harmful because muscle is a very metabolically active organ in the body, and so loss of muscle leads to insulin resistance, poor glucose tolerance, and so on. And so metabolic health is just extremely important. Building muscle is part of that. And of course, staying lean, with a relatively low amount of body fat is also very important because that feeds into metabolic health as well. So I think that in aging, this is metabolic health is a very underrated factor because when you read scientific studies of aging and you see what kind of physiological changes take place in aging, so often they have to do with poor metabolic health, increased insulin resistance, increased body fat, less muscle, all these kind of things. So these things are they're completely actionable. You can do things about them. All right. So, you can build muscle through resistance training, and also, I want to say properly performed resistance training can also increase cardiovascular fitness, your VO2 max. And then, of course, diet is extremely important. Diet is the biggest factor in staying lean and in keeping a relatively low level of body fat, and certainly as low amount of visceral fat as possible. Visceral fat, the kind of fat that's inside the abdomen, is very dangerous in health terms. So you don't want any of that. Um, so, diet and exercise are the two components here, and I believe that in both diet and exercise, we have been led astray by a lot of mainstream ideas. Certainly in diet, we could talk more about that if you want, but this is a topic that is discussed a lot on X and elsewhere about the fact like dietary guidelines have led people down the wrong path, and some people even consider them these dietary guidelines to be at least in part responsible for the obesity epidemic we see around us. In exercise, certainly there has been in the mainstream view, there has been not much emphasis on building muscle. It's more about cardiovascular fitness, which is of course good, but the exercise recommendations that come out are basically attuned to the least common denominator. In other words, people who don't want to exercise, so they tell them, okay, go for a walk 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. That's basically what the United States exercise guidelines say. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement in mainstream health recommendations, and I, given the fact that yeah, I'm getting pretty old myself. I pay a lot of attention to these kind of things. I want to do what's best, and I believe that I am. So I research these things, write about them, and so that's what I'm doing on X. I'm both I'm writing about these things, but I'm also uh, at least attempting to live them myself.
Right.
Absolutely.
So, what do you think is the factor that's holding people behind in getting healthier? Is it some sort of food addiction, or is it just the fact that they don't move enough? If you could pin on one main factor.
Well, if I wanted to choose between the two factors you just presented, I'd probably say it's the food. Because yes, a lot of people are, I would say they're addicted to certain kinds of food. And people are usually not, people are not addicted to steaks and salads. They're addicted to junk food, especially stuff that has a lot of sugar or, high fat, high carb combinations. And a lot of people don't want to give them up or have great difficulty in giving them up. Now, one of the things that I talk to my clients about this, food addiction, or let's say, let me put it this way. A lot of people tell me that they eat because they're stressed or because, of whatever reason. Sometimes people are depressed, so they eat. Anyway, emotional eating, stress eating, this kind of thing. But when people are stressed or they have emotions about something, then they always go for certain kinds of foods. They never go for like I said, the steak and salad, they don't go for that, right? So that, if when people say like I'm depressed, so I'm going to eat, it's always something like a pint of ice cream or, a package of Oreo cookies or, a bag of potato chips, something like that. So the thing is that it's, most of us have some kind of stress in our lives, certainly some more than others, but it's a whole lot easier to fix the food than the stress. And the thing about these foods, like say, the ice cream or cookies or, you know, cakes and donuts and all this kind of stuff, it's not, yes, some people do have addiction problems, but all human beings basically like this stuff. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that ice cream doesn't taste good. It absolutely does. And so, it lights up our brains. It gives us this dopamine hit that we just love. And so, um, it's not just a matter, I think, of certain people liking this stuff because virtually everyone does. It's a matter of choosing your health and fitness and your waistline as a priority over any short-term dopamine hits you get, the instant gratification you get from eating ice cream or potato chips or whatever it might be. So I think as far as the obesity crisis in the United States, which increasingly the rest of the world is starting to see as well, it's mostly about the food. If somebody wants to lose weight, diet is by far the biggest factor in fat loss. Now, as far as like you said, moving, right? So physical activity. Physical activity is, of course, very important for health. So I don't want to say that's not involved, but um, exercise alone has a pretty poor record for fat loss. So because people think that they're going to burn their excess body fat off by doing a lot of exercise, but there are a couple of problems with that idea. One is that exercise doesn't really burn all that many calories, not as many as people think. So, for example, let's say somebody went for a 5 mile run. Okay, so I think most people would think, yeah, that's a considerable amount of exercise. That's a lot more vigorous activity than most people do. So what happens if you run 5 miles in, let's say, an hour? You're going to burn about 500 calories. This depends on the size of the person doing the running, exactly how fast they're going. There are a lot of variables, but we can say just, on average, a typical person might burn 100 calories running 5 miles in an hour. Okay. Well, for one thing, that's only 400 more calories than somebody would burn if they just sat there. Okay, so they're burning an extra 400 calories by running those 5 miles, and like I said, most people consider that a very vigorous activity. If you burn those 400 extra calories, it's extremely easy to make up for it with food. I mean, especially the kind of hyper palatable junk food, that processed food that so many people are eating. It's very easy to eat 400 calories, so you totally make up for it. And you might say, well, okay, what if they don't make up for it? What if they exercise some restraint? Well, that would be good for sure, but exercise also does make you hungry. And so, if people aren't very careful about their diet, a whole lot of exercise is unlikely to be very helpful. And certainly the kind of exercise that most people are doing, like I said, most people are not going to go out and run 5 miles every day. Um, so diet is just extremely important, not only for staying lean or for losing body fat. It's important for your metabolic health. The composition of the diet, of exactly what people eat, is extremely important for metabolic health. Um, then, going back to the exercise or physical activity, yes, everybody should get physical activity on a daily basis of some kind. But if they don't change their diet, it's unlikely to be very helpful for fat loss.
Right. So there are two popular schools of thought when it comes to restricting calories. One would be the low fat and one would be low carb. So how do you differentiate between these two?
Right. So I'm definitely in the low carb camp, and have eaten low carbohydrate myself for many years. Um, I do have to say, though, that there is some evidence that carbohydrates alone are not responsible for the obesity epidemic. They're certainly playing a role, I believe, but you can look at many societies, cultures, now and in the past, that have eaten high carbohydrate diets, did not suffer from obesity or heart disease or cancer, seemingly. So it's not just carbohydrates. If the the um, the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity says that when people eat a lot of carbohydrates, their insulin goes up, and then this promotes storage of fat, storage of energy in body fat, and it certainly does. However, if somebody has normal metabolism, their insulin levels should come down again relatively soon after they eat, and then this allows the energy that's stored in body fat to come out of their fat tissue and into their body, supplying them with energy. And then they feel normal, not hungry, and so on. Um, so, um, the thing is, as far as the fat content of the diet, any fat that you ingest can seemingly be put almost effortlessly as storage into your fat cells with little to no insulin. So this is a factor too. I think that what is really going on, as far as obesity, this combination of high carb, high fat, right? So if you look at, let's say, sugar, for example, which is a carbohydrate, um, not too many people will eat sugar, a spoon of sugar out of the sugar bowl. I mean, it does happen, but it's not very common. People go for the combinations of sugar and fat. So, you see, say, pastries, right? Cakes, cookies, all these kind of things. These are combinations of carbs and fat, and these we human beings find this combination irresistible. So as far as the low carb part, yes, I do practice low carb eating, and I think anybody who has any degree of insulin resistance or glucose intolerance should be restricting their carbohydrates. And when I say anybody that has any degree of these things in the United States, that's the majority of people. So, from a scientific point of view, I think it's a lot more complex than just cutting carbs, but I think as a practical matter, it's a really good idea for most people.
Right. So you shared a very interesting perspective, I guess, a few months back, where you said there's a distinction between all carbs are bad and all bad food contains carbs. That's a very interesting take, and something that many people among the low carb community might not agree on. So, uh, could you just expand on this, like for our audience?
Sure. I think that the bad carbs, to my mind, are mostly refined grains and sugar. So these things, then we get into the whole seed oil thing, but you asked specifically about carbs. But refined grains, specifically white flour, and sugar, disrupts our gut microbiome. There are some theories or ideas that this is like the original starting point of obesity, diabetes, and so on. So these are the bad carbs. Um, what you might call good carbs might be things like, say, sweet potatoes, some starchy vegetables, and so on. I would say that, again, for most people who are insulin resistant or glucose intolerant or overweight, that even these so-called good carbs should be eaten, let's say, moderately. And as far as what about the bad food all containing carbs? So, right, the combination, getting back to what I was saying a minute ago about high carb, high fat foods. These things are what has been called hyperpalatable, and which is another way of saying people can't stop eating them. They like them so much, and so these are the bad foods, ultra processed foods, the kind of foods that are created in factories, the kind of foods that are created by scientists and engineers designed to make people like them a whole lot and be unable to stop eating them. I think we can I think we can say that addiction is the best business model. If people literally cannot live without your product, then you've got a great business there. And so this is what the big food companies are trying to do, is engineer these foods so that people can't stop eating them, that they're irresistible. And so these foods are not pure carbs per se, I mean, not too many people get strung out on plain white rice, for example. Um, so yeah, so there is a distinction, I think, between good carbs and bad carbs there. That the bad carbs are mostly refined white flour, some other refined grains, and the sugar, and these things are put in basically almost all processed foods, and people can't resist them.
Where would you put fruits?
I think fruits are okay in moderation. I think that maybe some people overdo it. And there are some very high sugar fruits that I think that maybe aren't so great, and especially like dried fruits like dates and raisins. There's also things like pineapple and so on. Maybe if somebody is metabolically healthy, they can eat these things without too much problem. But I think anyone who's overweight and trying to lose weight should probably uh, eat them in moderation only.
All right.
Right.
There's this trend of pushing low carb further into what we can call as the carnivore diet or keto diet. Besides certain therapeutic purposes, do you think for a general population that is a good idea?
Like the keto diet, well, I think it's a perfectly healthy way to eat. Um, and so whether everybody should be doing it, again, if we're talking about everyone, I mean, in the United States, 90% of the population has some degree of metabolic ill health. And so a ketogenic diet could, presumably help most of these people. Um, I have to say, on the other hand, this is something I've seen with clients a lot, is that people go on ketogenic diets, and certainly in most cases, depending on the exact composition of these diets, they are healthier than the standard American diet. However, I believe that they're not the most optimal thing for weight loss, because what happens very, very commonly is that people go on a ketogenic diet, and if they're coming to that from the standard American diet, yes, they do lose weight. But they often have trouble getting really lean. So if in other words, just hypothetically, somebody might have 40 pounds to lose, and then they lose 20 on keto, and then it kind of stops. So I think there are better ways to go about losing weight, and than the ketogenic diet. But for most people, it's a good idea. Keto just doesn't have as good a record for weight loss as a lot of people who advocate keto believe it does or say it does. That said, there are certainly health conditions that keto can immensely improve. I mean, one remarkable thing is like mental health, for example. There are cases of people with severe mental illness going on ketogenic diets and basically curing themselves by getting rid of all the carbohydrates in their diet. So, in that sense, it's certainly great.
Right, PD. So you covered the carbohydrate side of the equation, and you mentioned it's high carbs plus high fat, which is addictive. So can you shed a little light on the fats side, like you mentioned seed oils, etc.?
Right. So seed oils, yeah, they certainly is a lot of evidence that they can be implicated in the obesity epidemic. As far as mechanistic studies that show that seed oils, for example, seed oils can increase levels of endogenous cannabinoids, and basically, giving everyone the munchies so that they eat a lot more. And there are all kinds of reasons to think that seed oils are bad for us in other ways in terms of health, because chemically, linoleic acid, which is the major component of seed oils, it's a polyunsaturated fat, and it's easily oxidized. And this is a source of many of its health problems. Now, getting a little more a little subtlety into this discussion, because I see a lot of people on X, for example, in HealthX, putting the blame on seed oils for basically everything. And that I don't believe. I think it's perfectly possible for somebody to become obese without eating seed oils, without consuming them. So, that said, I'm against them, and I think people should avoid them as much as possible. But I don't think that they are responsible for every last health problem that we've got in this country.
Right. And since you have coached over 1,000 clients, what is your coaching philosophy and what kind of challenges you run into when you coach clients towards a better health journey?
Well, certainly, food addiction is one of them. So if people have a hard time, I know in other words, if I tell a client, okay, you need to stay away from potato chips or something like that, and if they have a hard time, if they just can't do it, then that is certainly a problem. Um, a big thing going on there with this kind of problem is that the foods that cause obesity or that prevent people from losing weight are everywhere. They are everywhere in the environment. You go outside your house, you go, it's just everywhere. Your workplace, and even inside your house, because if, people have families, and if one, so my client, let's say he or she wants to lose weight and go on a diet, but they've got a spouse, they've got children, other members of the family, and these people are all eating the same way. And if there's a lot of junk in the house, then some of these people can have a hard time staying away from all this stuff. So that is a big challenge, I would say, for many people. Many of my clients come to me and they say, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. And they do. And that's great. That's, for me, that's the easiest, right? They just do it. And then they lose substantial amounts of weight and get healthier and so on. But others have more of an addiction problem, or they're out a lot, and I personally don't have a problem staying away from junk food. I really just don't want it, while recognizing that a lot of it does taste good and everything, but generally I don't want it, and because I know what it does. I'll have a dessert, half a dozen times a year maybe, and that's about it. But I don't have to sort of steel myself uh, uh, from eating junk food. I don't get up in the morning and say, please keep me away from the donuts and pizza today. It just isn't like that for me. But I do recognize that if somebody is waving these things in front of your nose, it's a lot harder to resist. And so many of my clients are in such a position that, yeah, they're basically getting these things waved in front of their nose all day long. So that's tough. So it's definitely one challenge there.
Absolutely.
So, your workout is what I would call as very minimalistic. I think you believe work out like 20 minutes 2 times a week or something, if I'm not wrong. So, uh, like people would say that you don't get enough volume, don't get enough frequency and all that. So, What do you think they are going wrong, or rather, where you are getting it right?
Okay, all right, interesting question. So yeah, so my workouts take me typically 25 to 30 minutes, and I'm currently working out once every 4 days. Um, so one thing I see, I try not to pay too much attention to other people in the gym. I'm concentrated on my workout, but the thing that I do notice is I think most people are simply not training hard enough. So I do a workout that takes me 25 to 30 minutes. When I leave the gym, I basically feel like I've been hit by a truck. It is extremely hard. I'm always trying to do my best and work my hardest, always in a controlled fashion, always to avoid injury and so on. But it is very hard work. So I think most people don't understand that. Um, just how hard it is you need to train if you're going to train so briefly and relatively infrequently. Recovery is another issue, which I think is very underrated among people who talk about exercise. You need a lot of recovery if you do intense exercise. This doesn't happen just overnight. So if you're working on building muscle and you train hard, yeah, you do need plenty of recovery. Now, for somebody younger, a lot younger than I am, or somebody with different genetics and so on, they may be able to recover faster. However, it is my view that nobody should be doing weight training on consecutive days. They need at least one day in between each training session. Um, so if you train hard, um, you know, like I do, which is one set to failure, you don't need all the volume. There's been a lot of research in the last 10 to 15 years about high intensity training, much of it about high intensity interval training, which is more looking at more the cardiovascular conditioning side of exercise. But it certainly shows that intensity interval training, that a brief amount of exercise, if done at very high intensity, gives all the results, and even better in many cases than moderate intensity training. So, in other words, give you an example, there have been studies that have looked at, for example, they take a group of people and one group gets on a stationary cycle and pedals all out at a certain high resistance for 60 seconds, let's say, and then they have let's say 2, 3, 4 minutes in between, and then they do this again for a total of three intervals of 60 seconds each. The other group they put on cycle with somewhat less resistance, and these people pedal at moderate intensity for 45 minutes. Okay, so this is more like the standard, aerobic training, jogging type of exercise, this kind of thing. The people who do the high intensity interval training improve their fitness just as much, if not more, than the people who are doing the moderate intensity training in vastly less time. So, this principle, there's less work on this, but there is some good research on one set to failure. That if you do one set to failure, you're getting as much you're getting high intensity. You don't need as much volume. Furthermore, more volume uh, eats into your recovery time. So you want to get the optimal amount of exercise. You don't want less, you don't want more. You want the optimal amount that's going to stimulate muscle growth and give you and then allow you to recover. So you don't want to go back into the gym when you're not fully recovered. So I don't know if I've touched on everything there, but that's basically my philosophy of training. I get good results from it. I think people people need to train hard. They need to do it in a safe manner. There are a lot of misconceptions about high intensity training. A lot of people conflate it with using super heavy weights, and that's not what it is. High intensity refers to the amount of effort that you put into the lift. So, it's not about necessarily, deadlifting 300 pounds or something like that. It's not about doing heavy 1 rep max lifts. It's about pushing hard until you get to failure.
Right. Just a follow-up question on recovery. What would be the signs that you are actually pushing your limits and you're not, like you said, consecutive days strength training can be counterproductive. So what signs can someone see if, they're doing it wrong?
I think uh, the easiest way to think about that, I have a kind of seat of the pants rule for are you recovered or not. You are recovered if you feel recovered. And so when somebody goes in to do their strength training session, or really any other form of intense exercise, they should feel fresh and rested and ready to give it their best shot every time they do it. If they don't, then that's a sign that you're not fully recovered. I mean, unless there's something, some other obvious thing going on there, like you didn't sleep well the night before or something like that. But generally speaking, you're fully recovered if you feel recovered and if you're ready to give it a hard workout. This and another way of looking at this is that on off training days or just in your daily life generally, you should feel pretty good. Okay. So certainly the day after a workout, you can feel like, oh, okay, I really feel that workout. You might feel a little sore, a little fatigued, but generally speaking, you should be able to go about your daily life without any problem. Well, there's a certain class of people that can't do this. I mean, they're tired all the time and they're doing, and I run into this a fair amount with clients. Some people are just doing a tremendous amount of exercise and then wondering why they're tired all the time. So in some cases, it's pretty obvious that why they're tired when I find out how much exercise they're doing. So that's my rule. Basically, you are recovered if you feel recovered.
Right.
And this is going to vary, of course, among different people, right? Whether they're young or old, whether, what kind of genetics they have, how, what they're eating and so on. But that's my rule.
Right. And any thoughts on supplementation? Are supplements necessary and what do you recommend?
Well, so it depends on what you mean by necessary. There are some supplements, though, that I think most people could use. One is magnesium. Um, magnesium Magnesium has been depleted from the soil, and especially when people are eating a lot of processed foods, then they're not getting enough magnesium. Furthermore, if people drink caffeine or alcohol, this promotes basically wasting of magnesium. In other words, you excrete more magnesium than somebody who doesn't drink these things do. So I think most people can use magnesium as a supplement because magnesium is just so associated with better health outcomes. Basically, I don't think it would be an exaggeration to say that the more magnesium people ingest, the healthier they are. Um, Vitamin D is another one. So, the best thing to do, of course, is to get vitamin D from the sun, but a lot of people can't do that because they live in northern latitudes, or it's winter, or any number of other things, or they work all day. I mean, it used to be a couple hundred years ago, basically everyone worked outside, and so they would get some sun, at least seasonally. So vitamin D deficiency definitely should be remedied. And so vitamin D supplementation, I think, is appropriate for many people. Another one I like is vitamin K2. So this is a vitamin that is very important in vascular health. In other words, arterial health, basically keeping calcium out of your arteries. So the thing about vitamin K2 is that it can be kind of difficult to get in food. Like the biggest source of vitamin K2 is pastured dairy. Like for example, Kerrygold butter, which is comes from Ireland, from pastured cows. So a lot of us aren't eating too much of that kind of thing. And so I think vitamin K2 can be a very healthy supplement to take.
Right. So going back to the training part of things, as folks get for older folks, would you recommend like they stick to one type of training, that is like specificity in training, or you would suggest that they would try different sort of movements?
Well, I think that everyone should do strength training. And I think that this applies to, even the, little old ladies or little old men, basically everyone. In high intensity training, the beauty of high intensity training is that anyone can start from where they are. So like I said, it's not about, lifting super heavy weights or anything. You start with whatever your current level of strength is and go to failure. So everybody can do this. Of course, there's going to be some exceptions if somebody has, health problems or, some kind of limiting factors, disabilities, whatever that prevent them. They should probably get, good coaching, maybe physical therapy, that sort of thing. There is, in high intensity training, one thing is that if it's done properly, if people are going to failure on the exercise and then using minimal rest between exercises, you can get a good cardiovascular workout doing this. You can get a high heart rate going, be breathing hard throughout this workout. So if done properly, it is good cardiovascular conditioning. Now, that said, if somebody wants to do something that is, what we might call traditionally cardio, there's certainly nothing wrong with that. So people should find out what works for them. I would also say there's a couple of things here that we should distinguish between exercise and physical activity. So exercise, I would define as a structured activity that you do that is designed to improve your fitness. Okay, physical activity is basically anything else that you do while moving, anything else other than, sitting or lying in bed. Okay, so, for instance, gardening is a physical activity. Doing the laundry is a physical activity. For many people, walking, for example. Now, so it depends on where you are in health terms. If you got somebody that was in a nursing home and you got them to go out walking, this is going to be a stressful enough activity that it is going to improve their fitness. For many of us, most of us, I don't know, maybe not most of us, but for many of us who do structured exercise, something like walking or any other physical activity doesn't rise to a high enough intensity to improve our fitness. However, it is a healthy thing to do. Everybody should be moving in some way daily.
Right. In your book, Dumping Iron, you emphasize that high levels of iron can be harmful, especially for men. Can you shed more light on this? And what are the ideal ferritin levels as per your?
Right. So, yes, especially in men, women via menstruation have a way of basically dumping iron. So up until menopause, men obviously don't. So men can accumulate, and some women too. I don't want to leave that in, and especially after menopause. But for middle-aged and older men, especially, this can be a problem. Ferritin levels can rise quite high. Uh, Many men and women have, they will have some kind of genetic polymorphism that leads to them um, absorbing and absorbing more iron. When you absorb more iron, the thing is there's no regulated way of getting rid of it. And so ferritin levels can rise high. There are other factors too, metabolic dysfunction, which, as I've said before, is rampant in the United States, can lead to dysregulation of iron metabolism. So iron, like so many other things, is highly regulated as far as your body will regulate how much of it to absorb, and so on. So if you are iron replete, if you have enough iron, at least in theory, your body is supposed to stop absorbing it. But we see in many cases this does not happen due to metabolic dysfunction. Iron regulating hormones are dysregulated. So there's all kinds of evidence showing high ferritin levels being associated with worse health outcomes such as heart disease and cancer. So and in aging, this has certainly been shown in animal studies that excess iron accelerates aging. So I think this is something that people should be aware of. I think men in particular should at least once in a while, or, hard to say how often, but, find out what their ferritin levels are. I've come across many people that didn't know their ferritin levels. They got it tested and it was very high and they had no idea. In the extreme, there's a disease called hemochromatosis, and these people have they will absorb a lot of iron, and this causes severe health problems. These people can have ferritin levels, in the thousands. What is an optimal ferritin level? I believe that an optimal ferritin level is less than 100, and many people, especially men, have ferritin levels higher than that. And so this is one biomarker that I think they can look at and take action if necessary. The most obvious action being blood donation. That lowers ferritin.
All right. So I'm pretty sure that you have worked with at least a bunch of Indians or
Yeah.
South Asian population. So what do you see something that is different in these population? Like, I think you can like we all agree that Indians are or South Asians are generally not fat or obese in that sense, externally at least. So
Right. So yeah, yeah, that is correct. What I've seen, I've worked with many South Asian clients, and what you see there more is the skinny fat phenotype. Okay, so of course I'm not saying everybody in the subcontinent is skinny fat, but certainly the clients that come to me, many of them are. So in other words, they're over fat but under muscled, while their body mass index may be in the normal range. Now, this has been, it's not exactly like I'm the only one that has noticed this, because you can read about this in the medical literature that South Asians, mostly South Asians, I want to say some other Asian populations as well, can have poor health outcomes at a lower body mass index than Westerners. So what's going on there? There's been a lot written about that. Some people talk about genetics and so on. And my at least gut feeling is it's not about genetics. It's about diet. It has a lot to do with it. If people are eating a low protein, high carbohydrate diet, then this is not optimal for having much muscle. And the high carb, high sugar combined with seed oils diet, which I'm given to understand is pretty typical in India, um, certainly promotes body fat, excess body fat. So what you get here is somebody who has less muscle, higher body fat. So this is the skinny fat phenotype. So what they need to do is increase the protein in their diet, do resistance training, decrease, the carbs and sugar and seed oils. So yeah, that is the big thing. There's a phenomenon known very, very similar to what I'm talking about. There's a phenomenon known as normal weight obesity. In other words, somebody who has a body mass index that is normal, their weight is normal, but they have excess body fat. And they don't have, and because their weight is normal, the excess body fat means they don't have enough muscle either. So this is what I see. And it is of course correctable with diet and the right diet and the right exercise.
So you talk about sun, steak, and steel. What else do you want to add to this list for anyone who's looking to improve their health from today?
Yeah, well, I suppose there's a lot. I use that phrase sun, steak, and steel because it's shorthand for, for the important things. So sun, obviously you want to get sunlight in your eyes. I don't mean, of course, directly looking at the sun, but you want to be exposed to sunlight, and you also want to get sunlight on your skin. But I also use this as shorthand for get outside, get fresh air, get activity. Okay. Steak, of course, is, get back to the foods that human beings are really meant to eat. Doesn't have to be, of course, only steak, but certainly meat is one of the foods that humans are meant to eat, and, eggs, fish, and so on, along with some fruits and vegetables. So that's that. And steel, refers to resistance training, and or other exercise. Well, what else can people do? I think having, for good health, I think people should have good social relationships. There are studies that show that in old age, maybe it's not even old age, but anyway, that loneliness is just as big a health risk as smoking cigarettes.
Right.
So this is a very important factor. I think that people, especially as they age, should, how do I want to put it? Keep pushing. I mean, I don't, given my age, I'm going to be 70 very soon. And, I thought like, okay, well, how long do I want to go on doing what I'm doing and so on? And then I think, well, what's the alternative? What am I going to do? Sit in front of the television, play golf? Yeah, I don't want to do any of that stuff. And to me, retirement, at least as many people think of it, is just, my personal opinion, it's one step on the way to the grave. Why would you want to do that? I want to keep after it, doing what I'm doing as long as I can. At least that's how I look at it now. Maybe, who knows, 10 years from now, maybe I'll reassess and say, I just want to sit around for a while, but I don't think so. So both mentally and physically. So, you always want to be learning and studying and taking action on what you learn. And physically, you always want to be physically active, always trying to improve. So, yeah, those are a couple of things that come to me off the top of my head, other than sun, steak, and steel.
Just another question. So what is your diet advice for vegetarians?
So yes, I have had a number of vegetarian clients, many of them Indian. And so my dietary advice is to emphasize animal protein. So dairy and eggs. And and not just any dairy. So, I'm not a big fan of just plain old milk. So fermented dairy. So I know like in India you have paneer, things like that, and there's also yogurt, things like that, eggs. So these are good sources of protein. I think that many um, probably most vegetarians, whether they're Indian or American or anybody else, are probably not getting enough protein. So when vegetarians come to me for weight loss, this is one of the things I emphasize. You got to increase that protein intake. It doesn't necessarily have to involve eating meat, but it would involve animal protein because plant protein is just not as high quality as animal protein. For example, if somebody wants, you can get like pea protein supplements, for example. These are just not as good as something like a whey protein supplement. So that's one piece of advice that I give them is to increase the protein. I think for vegetarians that would be very helpful. Probably a lot of them could stand to take some creatine as well because they're not getting enough. So yeah, that's about it.
And with so many changes in the political landscape now in the USA, and with RFK Jr. talking about seed oils, and what public policy changes you see which can turn the tide for obesity and the metabolic epidemic?
You know, that's a tough one. Because I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about the dietary guidelines that the government has issued and how they have a plausible role in promoting the obesity epidemic. And so, I don't necessarily disagree with that. But what you see in the Make America Healthy Again movement, among many of them, is they want more government regulations. They just want different regulations than the ones we've had now. Um, to some extent, those are good. I mean, now people have talked a lot about, for example, food additives in processed food and how, we need to take those out of the food and so on. And yes, that can have healthful effects, but I don't think that comes anywhere near solving the problem of obesity because I don't think food additives play a major role there. They may play some role. So it's hard because unless you want to be anti-freedom and forbid, the manufacture of certain foods or something like that, it's tough. I think you can educate people, for example, but and I think the education in terms of diet that has come out so far from the government, from mainstream health sources, has been severely lacking, and that's putting it charitably. Yeah, you can improve that. Um, another way of looking at this is a lot of people are really they think they are really sure about what the problems are and how to fix it. Okay, and that is also a mistake in my opinion. Um, if you go back to the dietary guidelines that started coming out in the United States around 1980, and they emphasized um, consume less saturated fat or less fat altogether and increase your carbohydrate intake because they thought saturated fat clogged your arteries and so on. And so again, this advice plausibly led directly to the obesity epidemic in the United States. So they thought they had it right. And most people agreed with them at the time, but they didn't have it right. And so what are we going to do now that has the force of government behind it that may turn out to be wrong sometime in the future? So I think it's a tough nut to crack as far as improving people's health. Individuals have to want to improve their health. That's the big thing.
Right.
And I don't think you're going to get too far if people don't want to. So how do you change that? Well, there are things government can do. I think, I don't have these fully formed ideas. I'm not involved directly in this movement or anything like that. But, there's tax incentives, health insurance incentives, these kind of things. I mean, if somebody thought, just to use a hypothetical example, if I'm going to save $5,000 a year by losing 30 pounds, well, then I've got a pretty good incentive to do it. That doesn't mean they're going to go about it the right way. Doesn't mean it won't be difficult or something like that. But I think that is something that government might be able to do. I know that a lot of people have a lot of different ideas about this, but I think it's going to be a difficult problem, and those are some of the ideas I've had.
Right. So I think in Japan they have a law, metabolic law, for taxing people, and this was something one of our guests on our podcast mentioned, who has read your book, Dumping Iron, and improved his health through your book. So I believe those tax incentives could work.
Right. Yeah, there's issues of fairness and so on. I really don't know what to say about all that. Health insurance, not just health insurance, healthcare costs in the United States are outrageous. And they're extremely expensive. Many people have gone bankrupt from having a health problem and having to pay doctor and hospital bills and so on. But if you look at, for example, like diabetes, okay, so a huge fraction of healthcare dollars in the United States are spent on diabetes. And this is an entirely preventable illness, type 2 diabetes. And so you wonder, like, as a society, why are we all supposed to be paying for diabetes? You get into fairness there. So I'm not saying I have the answers here, but it gets very complicated, and I think that the problems are, hate to say it, not easily solvable.
Absolutely. So with that, we come to the end of this podcast, PD. We really, really appreciate making time for us and sharing your wonderful insights for our audience. We really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to be here and pleasure to talk with you.
All right. Take care. See you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Bye now.